Our next guest has worked with amazing brands such as Jet.com, Postmates, and Turner. And now he's working with Walmart, arguably the most successful company in the world, in transforming their growth function, and he's here to tell us all about it. Please welcome to the stage, Austin Hay.
Hey everybody. Oh, make sure this is right. Is that better? All right. Hey everybody. Thank you for making it out. Thanks, Nir, for an awesome presentation. I am here to talk to you guys about growth instrumentation. Growth instrumentation is probably a term that a lot of people have not thought about or even talked about, but it's core to running a great growth function across your product organization. Before I jump into that, a lot of you might not know who I am or what I do, so I'll just start out with a quick intro. Obviously, my name is Austin. I work for the Growth Practice, which is an enterprise consulting practice that works with very large Fortune 500 brands. We started about 1.5 years ago. Before that, I was an early employee at a company called Branch Metrics, which is an attribution and deep linking vendor. I helped grow the sales engineering and product team and got to meet a lot of great folks in mobile. So a little bit about TGP, because I have to do the quick sell so you understand why I'm here. We're an independent consulting firm that focuses on instrumentation and tooling for product and growth teams. We focus exclusively on the enterprise because we deal with some of the complex challenges, both behaviorally and organizationally, that come with being at a big enterprise. Sometimes it's not as easy to be a startup and be able to build everything yourself. A little bit about the customer engagements and the work we do. I think actually we removed a couple slides to speed up things, but we really focus on 3 things. One is point technology implementation. So a lot of you guys have heard of some of the vendors here, like Amplitude. Others are like AppsFlyer, Branch, mParticle, Segment, LeanPlum. These tools that help you do things. We help you implement them if you're short on good team members. Secondly, we help you design a fully instrumented and connected stack. I'm going to go into why that's important in a little while. But a really great technology stack with firm instrumentation is what helps you actually do the things that I'm sure you've heard about in different growth presentations. And then third, for very large enterprises, we're talking Fortune 500, we actually help stand up these different stacks, implement them, maintain them, and manage them so that you can focus on the really heavy lifting, which is building a growth practice and a growth team around that instrumentation and tooling. So the reason why I'm here to talk to you guys and why I think it's important to be on stage is to tell you that good growth and real growth starts with instrumentation and tooling. And so I was thinking about it, and it seems to me like all the great names you hear in growth, like Pinterest and Airbnb and Postmates, they all are kind of in this startup stage. And what does that mean? It means they have a lot of engineering resources, they have great, smart people, they have well-funded companies, they can move fast. And these are some of the things I laid out. The first one is many Fortune 500 companies, by comparison, also have very ambitious goals. Maybe they don't have the same engineering resources. The problem, though, is huge Fortune 500 companies don't understand that the approach is somewhat wrong. And what I mean by that is, I'm taking a very well-known framework, run, walk, and crawl. They have the idea of, I want to stand up an entire growth team. I have these ambitious goals, maybe a North Star metric of improving revenue or increasing engagement. And that's a phenomenal goal. I'm not at all dissing that. The problem is they're not thinking about, how am I going to get there? What are the things between now and then that I have to do as a leader of an organization in order to get us to that place where we can actually execute growth? And the way that I list this is, you think of crawl as investment in tooling and infrastructure in order to actually be able to measure. You think of walk as the ability to take that investment and then capitalize on it, create leverage, expand among the organization, document things that you can actually put a team on top of that, and then go do all the amazing things that you've probably read about in Reforge or Y Combinator or all these other sources. And so that's the point here, is that a lot of growth starts and ends with instrumentation and tooling, and we're not always talking about that. Mostly because there's this expectation among companies that you have to do it yourself. And especially at the enterprise level, I think there's a fear of buying tools. And so you always get into that conversation of, do we build this or do we buy it? I'm a big believer in a mixture of the two. I don't think you should go buy everything. I also don't think you should build everything. And actually, the folks that I work with at Walmart tend to agree. So what does growth for the enterprise actually look like? I talked about this crawl, walk, run framework, and I just want to dig a little bit more in so it's more specific. One of my pet peeves as a product manager is when stuff is super vague and fluffy, so I feel like I owe it to you guys to be a little bit more specific. And I'll hop down here and just talk about it. At the very top, when you start to crawl, when you're thinking about growth, before you even think about going over a North Star metric or going after increased revenue or expanding your omni-channel customers by 5x, whatever your ambitious goals are, that's great. But think about first, how are you going to invest in tools to get you there? What is the data and different pieces of metrics that you need in order to help you instrument and observe the change over time? So what I mean by that is taxonomy. If you don't have a data plan for what you're going to measure, how do you know when you finally get to that North Star metric if you've been following along the way and you've been making progress? If you don't have a plan up front, you're never going to get there. Other important things that people usually neglect, a single customer view, just the fact of tracking all your users in one historical record over time is extremely important for any type of mobile marketing, let alone web and other type of marketing. And then this is my own thing, but the two pieces where I see big enterprises usually falling flat is they don't think about the time, energy, and human capital that will go into deploying an integration properly, which is totally crazy because the enterprise, you're investing somewhere between $500,000 and multiple $1 million into a different set of tools that you either deploy in-house or buy. If you don't have an insurance policy for making sure that it's done properly, you're basically throwing money down the drain. And on top of that, so say you have a combination of building, buying tools. Maybe you send out all your data to Redshift, but you're using a tool like mParticle for a customer data platform. Maybe you're using Amplitude to help visualize your data. People don't think about these vendor tools as an opportunity to get more information and more data into their own data stack so they can better understand their users and take action. And so my third kind of requirement, or last requirement down here for the crawl stage, is setting up really good instrumentation and tooling to get data back into your own system so you have it forever. The walk stage, so you've thought out your stack, you've thought out about all the tools and systems you need to build, and you kind of come up with an 8 to 9 month plan of how you're going to get there. Walking is really then unifying that goal with what you have to do and building a moat around the actual stack that you're going to build. Because very commonly in, at least what I've experienced in larger enterprises, is there is a variety of tools and ways to do something. There could be legacy systems. You could be dealing with teams that use things like Omniture. You could be dealing with internal systems that have been used for 15 or 20 years. It's very important that once you've landed on a project plan to get you from where you are today to where you need to be tomorrow for product management, that you actually create a unification system around it, and you build a moat around the idea that this is going to be the thing that helps us grow a growth team. And really the moat is somewhat technical in the sense of setting up integrations to actually pipe data into the right places, and then somewhat more psychological in the sense of aligning organizational resources around this idea. The last part of walking is actually just very simple, and I hope people believe me when I say documentation of what you're doing basically is the difference between a startup and an enterprise. A lot of times in startups, you're moving so fast that you just have the capacity and technical resources to move without documenting. In a very large enterprise where people come and go as things move slower and where you have to have repetitive conversations over and over again in order to inform the organization about what is being done, I cannot tell you how important documentation is in achieving your goals. So that's why as you go from walk, you should be starting to document along the way. What are our key business objectives? What are the things we want to achieve? How are we going to achieve them? What tools are going to connect into our legacy systems? And how are we going to use them in order to actually grow a growth team? As you document that stuff along the way, hopefully by the time you get to running, you don't have to do any of that work. You already have an entire playbook of how technology works and how you're going to use it to build a great growth team. So now we get to this concept of growth execution, right? And at the bottom of my slide before, I'd called it growth process. But it's really about now you have tooling and instrumentation in place, and you want to go execute. You want to be able to achieve the things that Andrew Chen writes about in his blogs. You want to be able to listen to the blogs that Casey Winters points out and say, I want to try that, and I can try it because I have the tools in place to do it. That's growth execution. And so at the very top of growth execution, investment in instrumentation and tooling. And there's also a piece of management. It's not like you can just do it once and forget about it forever. There's constant reinvestment in making sure that you have the instrumentation in place to do what you need to do. I have my own kind of concept of a best-in-class stack. Everybody has the tools that they love, and I'm not here to sell you on anything else. But I do think there are a couple key components you should think about, especially if you're in mobile. Customer data platform is at the core, and a deep linking and attribution tool to run good UA and paid campaigns is important. Having geo-source data, meaning having in-store data if you have a retail presence, is fairly important. Engagement, retention, and product analytics are two of the most important things you can either buy or build. I mean, having a push provider and email provider that's set up and instrumented with your customer data platform is important because what you're going to want to do in the long run is you're going to want to have the ability to come up with an idea, think about it very quickly, create a campaign or test, run it, throw it back into your customer data platform, and observe it in a product analytics tool. Over time, you want to track those cohorts and see if what you did actually made any sense, if it had an improvement or maybe didn't have an improvement. If you don't have this type of capability and functionality from the start, it doesn't matter how many great blogs you read about growth, you're never going to be able to get there unless you have the instrumentation and tooling in place. So once you have instrumentation and tooling, now you're usually at the place that a lot of people start, which is, I like this cool word called growth. How do I stand up a growth team? And there's a couple different models for it. Usually I see it splitting two ways in between an independent model or a functional model. There's a ton of great literature online about independent and functional models. So for the sake of time, I'm just kind of going to gloss over this. These slides will be on SlideShare, and I shared a little quote that I had from one of my friends at Reddit named Alex Lee, who kind of talked about functional and independent models. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to jump forward. After you define a team structure, then you have to get to the meat of it of building growth values and growth strategy. And that's where everything that you've probably read about or learned about coming out of Silicon Valley is super important. Growth values, in particular, can be a variety of things. These are some of the questions that I tend to probe on teams when they're setting up their growth values. What do you think about measurement and data? How important it is to you, and how important it is to your core philosophy and structure? Usually, if instrumentation and measurement is not baked into the DNA of the team, you're not going to ever be able to do true growth. Some other questions that are important is, what do you think about prioritization, and how do you prioritize? How does this fit into an experimentation framework? What's your philosophy around shipping products? What's the speed, cadence, and frequency that you care about? Do you care about doing a really, really high-quality ship every 2 months? Or what about a really, really okay MVP every 2 weeks? What do you think of going from ideas to delivery? And what are some of the personal values that you think are important in building your team? And this is where people can put their own independent experience in whatever team they're creating. So after you've defined growth value, you've thought about the growth team you want, you've thought about the growth stack and the instrumentation and tooling you want, now you're in a place to actually use that as leverage to prioritize ideas, experiment, and iterate. That's like something that probably everybody here has heard, so it's not new, and it's not like I'm creating this for the first time. Growth is all about taking ideas, prioritize them, putting in experiments, and shipping them. The problem is a lot of people don't know how to do that because they don't have the tooling and infrastructure in place, which is one of the reasons why at the very beginning of this slideshow, I just stressed the importance in instrumentation and tooling. Once you've gotten to this point where you have instrumentation and tooling, and you're able to think about what experiments you need to run, and you have the capability to do it, this is where what Sonia was talking about earlier, a North Star metric can be insanely important for helping you clear out the noise from what's really valuable. And usually, a North Star metric has a couple of qualities. And I'm kind of like hijacking these from one of my old mentors, a guy named Tanner McGrath, who actually works at Amplitude now. First, it should represent the full funnel, meaning it's not just siloed to one part of the customer journey, like paid or engagement. Second, it has to be super easy to understand because you're going to be bridging the gap between product, engineering, and marketing. So it has to be basically in layman's terms. It has to relate to revenue. Unless you're just going to be funded forever by Zcash, you have to relate it to real money. And it has to be tied somehow to natural human behavior or frequency. So the 4 categories for North Star metrics that you can kind of put into a matrix are breadth, depth, frequency, and efficiency. And these are like different actionable metrics that are a function of these specific qualities. And so breadth is going to be how many active returning users there are performing a certain activity. Depth is the extent of their engagement. Frequency is how often they engage or perform a certain action. And efficiency is how quickly they actually return to get value. And so let's put this in a little example first. When we think about the different actionable metrics as a function of these different characteristics, I created 2 different examples. One is with a type of app that's like very generic. So you have weekly active users, the number of truth signals per day, days active per week, conversion from start session to that truth signal. So a practical implementation of this would be like weekly content, streaks, purchases, omni-channel users. For depth, which would be like a truth signal per day, you have a push reminder, you have another reminder maybe in-app, you have an email. It can be intelligent and dynamic. And this goes back to the stack that we built. Intelligence and the ability for it to be dynamic totally depends on the inputs you're putting into the stack. So if you have a tool like Radar that's sending you geodata every second somebody walks into one of your stores, you can be really smart about how you leverage these truth signals. You can send them push reminders at a really intelligent spot in time. If you don't have that tooling and instrumentation in place, then you're basically forced to do whatever you can actually see in the tool you're using. For frequency, everybody should be familiar with frequency metrics, number of likes, number of comments. These are the things that are habit forming in a way, the things that people come back to. And efficiency, what's kind of surprising about efficiency is efficiency takes up the most amount of time from a technical perspective, but probably only provides, I mean, at least on this grid, 25% or less of the value. This is like, did people deep link directly to my emails and my content? How many actions did they take from an email and push? Am I using AMP? Did they go from the beacon to completion? All these things are like technical efficiency plays, which are important in order to drive value to the customer. But there are so many other metrics you should be looking at. And actually, in fact, this efficiency thing should probably be better forced over to this side of the graph because efficiency only matters if you're doing these other things well. So the key, I guess, takeaway from this is that North Star metrics obviously drive a lot of product value, but you cannot get there without having the instrumentation in place for a best-in-class stack. And I wanted to go over one quick example of like a sample stack, and then I know we have to wrap up. So we talked about North Star metrics being valuable, and we talked about these 4 different categories. Well, what are different tools in market and in this best-in-class stack that you can set up with very little effort in order to get there? And here's like a sample stack, with Walmart. You could have something like mParticle for a customer data platform. This allows you to experiment around audiences. You could have a tool like AppsFlyer that allows you to experiment with paid media. You can spend money, deploy capital on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, get all that data back into mParticle. You can use a tool like Button to drive mobile affiliate, again, piping everything back in your customer data platform. You can use tools like Radar in order to tie in geodata. And then, Urban Airship or another tool in order to drive push notifications and email back into mParticle. Now, at the end of the day, one of the core value props of a product analytics tool like Amplitude is not only the ability to look at really cool product insights, but also to unify your different data streams into one spot. Typically speaking, big enterprises deal with the challenge of how do we get mobile-centric data into our systems and then also out to all of our marketing vendors who we want to deploy capital with. Well, that's where a tool like Amplitude can be very helpful because you can create a single spot in order to just view all your data. So even from a marketing perspective, it could be really useful. We're out of time, so I'm going to just jump across this and just wrap up real quick. So key point here is tools and instrumentation enable you to do a lot of cool stuff that you can read about in blogs and see in presentations that are probably far more interesting than mine. But don't neglect the power of tools and instrumentation. Secondly, tooling creates leverage. Once you have tooling in place, you have leverage because you have the capacity to take quick actions, and you can actually drive the experimentation and ideas that are going to help you build a real growth function. And then last, clearly document your growth process, because typically what happens is people try to jump immediately into growth without having the infrastructure in place and having a clear roadmap and playbook that's going to help them get there and evangelize within a larger organization. And with that, we can just take a couple questions if we have time. And if not, no problem.
One.
OK, one question.
One question.
Great. Cool.
Oh, wait, right here.
Hi, thank you a lot for this. It's really helpful working for a product team that's in the process of building that stack and suffering the pains from it. So while we're in this process, if, say, we don't have an A/B testing framework in place, what is kind of your advice on how we can start to kickstart our growth without having that methodology?
Totally. So I think a lot of people prescribe to two different philosophies. It's either all in one, like we're going to buy a tool that does everything, because we kind of face this problem that you talked about, which is we're trying to build a best-in-class stack. We don't have resources, time, maybe money for everything. So how can we get the most value out of the fewest, paths to activation? And what I find is you can still, for example, A/B test with tools that might not specifically be designed for A/B testing. Right? So out of the stack that I had shown earlier, the question I would ask is, where do you want to do A/B testing? Do you want to do A/B testing in the app? Do you want to do A/B testing with your email campaigns? Do you want to do A/B testing with your product or UA campaigns? That's the question that you should think about first, and that's largely informed by where do you think you have the highest value to acquire or retain users, which should be guided by your North Star metric. So if you look at your situation and you say, well, based on a North Star metric, we think that we should be focusing our time, energy, and attention on email and push, because that's going to drive our North Star metric the most. Well, then the question I have for you is, what does A/B testing look like between email and push? And does it have to be outside of the app or in the app? Do you care about understanding which messaging, for example, on the push is driving the most value? Or do you want to understand, once somebody is inside the app or inside the website, we want to A/B test the user experience from there? Because those are two very different use cases. And that's largely would inform what tools you either buy or build. So anchoring more towards the higher prioritization of customers is kind of going to be key. And then at some point in time, not everybody can force everything they want into a best-in-class stack. And so there's also these MVPs you can do along the way in order to get there. And there are a large number of customers that we've worked with where they might have a customer data platform and an attribution tool, and that gets them 80% of where they need to be because they can do A/B testing on their campaigns, and that's driving all their value for UA and paid. So it doesn't have to happen all at once. I obviously painted a very rosy picture for a final state. Cool. I don't know if there's any other questions, but